I have challenged myself to watch a horror movie every day of the month of October. Here are the rules for the challenge. You probably already know them if you watched the video for week 1, so let's go ahead and jump into week 2. Today I watched ReAnimator. This is a horror comedy based on the story by H.P. Lovecraft. I've read the original story this movie is based on, and honestly, I didn't really like it. The story took itself very seriously, which wouldn't be a problem except that it's so ridiculous that it's almost comical. So turning this story into a horror comedy that takes itself less seriously is a great idea. This is one of those horror classics that everyone talks about that I just haven't gotten around to seeing. But I'm glad I finally did, because this was a lot of fun. The dialogue here is witty and funny, and it can go from being comical one moment to intense the next moment pretty seamlessly. The actor who plays Herbert West was great. He really sells the character. His performance is the perfect blend of serious and silly. It's exactly what the character needed. Unlike the original story, all of the characters here actually had understandable motivations for their actions. The movie overall just made a lot of improvements to the story that made it more enjoyable. I don't think everything about it works as well as it could have, but I definitely had a lot more fun watching this than I did reading the story it was based on. Today I watched Audition, and it was, very interesting. This is a Japanese film that is a bit of a mix in terms of genre. The first 2/3 of it is more of a slow burn mystery and drama wrapped up into one, but the last 25 minutes are pretty horrifying, which is why this is considered a horror movie by a lot of people. I don't want to say too much about the plot here because this is another one of those movies where it's best going in blind. It's also really easy to spoil because when you get done watching it, you're going to want to talk about the crazy ending. This is a movie that I feel will definitely grow on me over time. I can tell it's got quite a few layers under its surface that I'm sure will reveal themselves after some reflection or upon rewatching the movie. The movie really hinges on the main character, and thankfully he's written pretty well, and all of the movie's themes and messages are based on his actions. I would really like to say more about this movie because I do feel like there's a lot to discuss about it, but I can't really do that without getting into spoilers, so I'll just stop here and say go watch it and stay away from any trailers or plot synopsis. Hell, I'd even avoid some of the posters for this movie because they literally include images of the final scene. I really liked this movie and I highly recommend it. Today I watched Vampeer. This is an early sound film from Germany made in 1932. The story here is really interesting. It starts out with a man giving the main character a package that reads, "To be opened upon my death," and from there it becomes a story about vampires. I really liked the visual presentation of this movie. It uses hard lighting and strong shadows, which not only give the movie a creepy, dreamy feeling, but also make certain events feel ghostly and mysterious. The way shadows were used were very creative, and it made me wish more movies used them the way this movie does. I really enjoyed the interior and exterior sets in the movie. One in particular I liked for its use of skulls and skeletons as decoration. The movie overall felt very dreamlike with its visual presentation, slow pacing, and surreal story. This is another one of those movies that I appreciate more on a historic level rather than enjoy on an entertainment level. On that note, I did find myself bored several times watching it, but overall, I think it's a very unique experience. Today, I rewatched The Shining. Obviously, I really like this movie. I mean, come on. It's The Shining. It's not only one of the greatest horror movies of all time, it's one of the best films of all time, period. There has been so much said in praise of this movie that there's nothing I can really add to the conversation, so I'm not going to try. All I will say is that everything about it is just perfect. Today I got together with some friends and we marathoned a couple of horror movies. First, we watched Nightmare on Elm Street. This was a rewatch for me and I still hold it in high regard. It's got a great story and an iconic, terrifying villain. In my opinion, Freddy Krueger is the scariest slasher movie villain. He looks like a monster right out of a nightmare, which is fitting. The entire movie is creative with memorable kills and great practical effects. Wes Craven's direction also really elevates certain shots and scenes to a whole new level. The concept of basing a horror movie around dreams is genius, and I don't know why more horror movies don't play with the idea. That being said, I can't blame anyone for not trying, since this movie did it so well. Then we watched Nosferatu the Vampire. This is a 1979 remake of the silent film, which was shot simultaneously in German and English, but we watched the English version. This movie looks great, and that's mostly thanks to the beautiful shooting locations. It also has a great soundtrack that really adds to the atmosphere of the movie. It's really well acted with convincing performances from everyone involved. With all of this being considered, I didn't really like this movie. I'm not a huge fan of the silent film to begin with, but I would rather rewatch that than go through this again. This entire movie was just so boring for me, and I'm not exactly sure why. It's paced very slow, there's no sense of fear or tension at all. It's a movie that is nearly a beat-for-beat remake of the original, which works to its detriment because some of the elements of the original just don't work outside the style of German Expressionism. The actor playing Dracula is good, and I'm not trying to throw shade on his performance, but his face is so not terrifying. It's hard to fear a vampire that doesn't look like he could hurt a fly. All that being said, these problems would not matter as much if it was in a movie I enjoyed. And I can't really explain why I didn't enjoy this. I just didn't. It was a very dull experience for me and for some of the other people watching it with me. So, to spice things back up, we watched Freddy vs. Jason. This movie was terrible. The way the movie tries to set up the rivalry between these two villains is so forced and nonsensical. We don't even get to see them fight each other until after an hour into the movie. Up until that point, it just tries to be a Friday the 13th movie and a Nightmare on Elm Street movie at the same time. And those tones don't mesh very well together. As a result, the entire movie is really ineffective as a horror movie. It has a terrible soundtrack where early 2000s alt rock and nu metal will start to play randomly, and on top of all of that, it is edited terribly. All this being said, I really enjoyed this movie. I think it's hilarious. They really go over the top with this movie. The kills are ridiculous, the performances are so manic they're funny, the script is filled with lines that make no sense, and the entire movie feels like a cartoon. Sure, we don't get to see Jason and Freddy fight for an entire hour, but when they do fight, it's so ridiculous that it looks like an episode of Looney Tunes. This movie made everyone in the room laugh non-stop. It's a movie where a CGI caterpillar of Freddy smokes a bong, and where Jason electrocutes someone by touching them while he is being electrocuted. This is not a good movie at all, but it sure was a fun time. Today, I'm going to use one of my skip days. I just don't have enough time to watch a movie today, and I've also had several days here in the past 2 weeks where I have watched more than one horror movie in a day, so I think I have more than earned it. Today I watched VHS, and I didn't really like it. This is a horror anthology of found footage short films that I had been wanting to check out for a while. It really let me down though. I am okay with some shaky cam and found footage movies because that just kind of comes with the genre, but the shaky cam here is so frequent at points that it's just annoying and sickening. The biggest letdown here is with the story and the characters it presents. Most of the stories here aren't very good. Several of them have plainly obvious plot twists that you can see coming from a mile away. Almost all of the characters are loud, annoying, horny teenagers that I grew to hate pretty quickly. Most of them are also really stupid and make dumb decisions. There's a lot of dumb stuff that happens in these stories in general that completely breaks the immersion. Top all of this off with its bad tie-in story. There's a central story here to try to explain why we are seeing all of these VHS tapes. Not only is it totally unnecessary, but it's just awful. It follows this group of men as they roam around looking for women to molest for their live porn site. Then they stumble upon this house with a bunch of VHS tapes and we get into the anthology. Again, this tie-in story is not only completely unnecessary, but also unjustifiably reprehensible on a moral level. I nearly never felt any tension watching this, and I was actually bored most of the time. That being said, it wasn't all bad. The last two stories in this anthology were pretty decent. Their execution was so-so, but unlike other stories here, they weren't woefully predictable, and they didn't have characters that grated my nerves. There's some effective moments in some of the other shorts as well, but they're buried by so many awful elements that it doesn't really matter. All in all, this movie has a lot of good concepts, but they have poor execution all around. There's a sequel to this which I hear is marginally better, but this doesn't make me very enthusiastic about checking it out. And that's it for week 2, everybody. Stay tuned for week 3 where I will hopefully watch movies that are better than VHS. I'm Randall the Vandal, and thank you for watching.